The CNN debate stage wasn't just another TV set tonight. It felt like the epicenter of a brewing political earthquake. The overhead studio lamps blazed so hot they turned the polished debate desk into a sheet of glass reflecting sharp white streaks into the audience's eyes. The air in the room was thick, dense with anticipation, like the moment before a jury returns with a verdict. Behind the cameras, producers moved in hushed, clipped steps, speaking into headsets with a sense of urgency that betrayed their calm expressions. The click of camera shutters echoed like distant gunfire, short, sharp bursts that sliced through the murmurs in the room. Every seat in the audience was filled, and every eye was trained on the two figures at center stage. On the left sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. Her charcoal gray suit was immaculate, tailored to perfection, the kind of outfit that spoke of discipline without saying a word. She sat with her back straight but not rigid, poised, composed the calm in the middle of an approaching storm. One hand rested lightly on a blue folder in front of her. The other lay flat on the desk as if grounding her to the moment. Her eyes, dark and steady, were locked ahead. Not at the cameras, not at the crowd, but at the man sitting opposite her. They held no fear, no flinch, just the quiet weight of someone who had carried bigger battles than this. On the right sat Senator J.D. Vance. Shoulders squared, his chin tilted up just enough to suggest defiance. His fingers tapped against the desk in a slow, deliberate rhythm, a metronome of control, or perhaps of rising impatience. A faint smirk clung to the corner of his mouth, the kind of expression that said he'd already decided how this night would end. Every few seconds he shifted in his chair, adjusting his cufflinks, letting his gaze sweep across the audience like a man rehearsing his victory lap. Between them, a stretch of polished desk gleamed under the lights, empty yet heavy with the unspoken. Every glance, every shallow breath was a silent exchange of messages. The tension was so tangible, it seemed the air itself had stopped moving. Somewhere in the crowd, a woman leaned to whisper to the man next to her, "Something's going to happen." The man didn't answer. His eyes, like everyone else's, stayed locked on the two people who were about to collide. And when it happened, no one in this room would forget it. Senator J.D. Vance leaned forward, his elbows resting on the polished desk, his voice steady but sharpened to a point. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "This isn't housing policy," he said, his tone dripping with disdain. "This is dangerous racial propaganda." The words cut through the room like a blade. A few audience members leaned back in their seats, eyebrows rising. Others nodded in quiet agreement, their expressions tightening, as if they had just heard a truth no one else dared to say. Vance's voice rose slightly, each syllable hitting with rehearsed precision. "You're not here to fix the problem, you're here to divide America. And I think everyone in this room knows it." Cameras swung toward him, catching the hard lines in his face, the calculated anger in his eyes. Somewhere in the control room, a producer likely thought, "This is the soundbite well run on every news loop tonight." From the corner of her eye, Jasmine could see the audience's body language shift, people straightening in their seats, leaning subtly toward Vance as if the gravity of the room had tilted in his direction. He looked like a man in control, a man delivering what he thought would be the killing blow. And in that moment, Vance believed he had the upper hand. The smirk from earlier returned stronger now, curling at the edges of his mouth, like he was savoring the moment. He didn't know it yet, but he was stepping into the exact trap Jasmine had been building from the second she walked in. Jasmine didn't rush. She didn't match Vance's volume or his theatrics. Instead, she reached down and unlatched her blue folder with a soft click that somehow carried across the room. Her movements were deliberate, calm, almost slow enough to be unsettling. She slid out a single sheet of paper, its edges slightly worn, the top stamped with a government seal that caught the light. Without a word, she laid it flat on the desk between them, turning it just enough so that the text faced Vance. The moment his eyes fell on the page, the change was instant. The smirk evaporated. His brow furrowed, then smoothed too quickly, as if he realized too late he'd given something away. A faint muscle in his jaw twitched. The audience couldn't see the fine print yet, but they felt the shift. The murmurs stopped. Even the camera operators, trained to keep moving, hesitated for a fraction of a second. Jasmine kept her gaze steady on Vance, saying nothing. The silence wasn't empty. It was a pressure growing heavier with each heartbeat. Somewhere in the crowd, a pen clicked nervously. The rest of the room might as well have been holding its breath. And in that thick electric stillness, one truth became clear. Jasmine hadn't come here to trade insults. She had come to draw blood, and she just placed the blade on the table. The paper between them wasn't just a document, it was a loaded weapon disguised in legal ink. Across the top in bold black letters, the title read, Urban Redevelopment Strategic Plan, Phase 3. The kind of title that sounded harmless, even progressive, until you understood what it really meant. The pages were thick, the kind of heavy stock used for deals meant to last decades. Faint silver embossing marked the header, and just below it a series of clauses marched down the page in precise, lifeless type. But it was the bottom that told the real story. There, cutting across the white like a wound, was J.D. Vance's signature etched in hard slanted strokes and underlined once in a deep, almost blood-red ink. Next to it sat a small notary seal, the raised stamp catching the light like a silent witness. Every camera in the room began to zoom in. Viewers at home wouldn't need a commentator to explain what they were seeing. It was his name, his hand on a contract that tied him directly to a redevelopment plan targeting neighborhoods already hanging by a thread. To most people, it might have looked like just another urban planning document. To Jasmine, to the communities who had lived this nightmare, it was a blueprint for erasure. Every line item, every revitalization zone was another eviction notice waiting to be printed. And there it was in black letters and red ink proof that the man sitting across from her wasn't just voting on policy, he was signing off on the displacement of hundreds of families. Jasmine let the cameras drink in the image of the contract for a few seconds longer, making sure the signature and the blood-red underline had burned themselves into the audience's memory. Then she finally spoke, her voice calm, steady, but carrying an edge that could cut through steel. This isn't about policy, she said, her eyes never leaving Vance. It's about profit. The words landed like a hammer in the dead silence of the room. For a split second, no one moved. You could hear the faint hum of the stage lights overhead, the distant whir of a camera lens adjusting focus. Then the air shifted. A murmur rippled through the audience, starting like a whisper in the back row and swelling forward. Some gasped softly, others exchanged wide-eyed glances. Even the journalists in the press section, trained to stay impartial, leaned forward in their chairs, pens poised, knowing they just heard the line that would headline tomorrow's papers. Vance's jaw tightened, his smirk gone, replaced with something heavier, calculation. But it was too late. Jasmine had already set the tone, and the weight of her words hung over the room like a thundercloud. Jasmine didn't give the room time to settle. With one subtle motion under the desk, she clicked a small remote. The screen behind them lit up, replacing the CNN debate logo with a paused video frame, J.D. Vance standing at a podium mid-sentence, his hands gesturing wide. The clip rolled. His voice, unmistakable, filled the room. We need to rethink investing in these non-productive zones. These areas are culturally bankrupt. The words echoed in the chamber like a slap. A collective inhale swept through the audience. On screen, Vance was smiling faintly, speaking to a small crowd months earlier. In the present moment, however, that smile was nowhere to be found. Vance's body stiffened, his jaw locked tight, the faint muscle near his temple pulsing. He didn't blink for several seconds, as if sheer stillness could undo what everyone was now hearing. The cameras caught everything. The subtle tightening around his eyes, the way his shoulders stopped moving. The flicker of panic that tried to hide behind a mask of composure. But the damage was done. In less than 15 seconds of footage, Jasmine had ripped open a wound he couldn't close on live television. The applause had barely faded when Jasmine stepped off the stage. The bright, punishing studio lights gave way to the dim, cooler glow of the backstage corridor. Here the energy was different. No roaring crowd, no camera flashes, just the low hum of production equipment and the shuffle of staffers packing up. Her heels clicked softly against the polished floor as she moved toward the green room. She was still replaying Vance's frozen expression in her mind when she noticed it. On the leather chair where she'd left her bag sat a plain manila envelope. No name, no return address. Just the word "wait" scrawled in blue ink across the front. Her first instinct was caution. In politics, envelopes left behind rarely carried good news. She scanned the hallway, no one watching, no sign of who might have left it. Slowly she peeled it open. Inside were 4 folded pages. The first was a zoning map marked in thick red lines like a battlefield diagram. Entire blocks were circled areas overwhelmingly occupied by minority families. Across the top in block letters, redevelopment priority. The second was a printed email chain between executives at a private equity firm, Vance's top donor. Words like clearance timeline and non-voting density leapt off the page, underlined in black pen. The third page was a spreadsheet of eviction addresses matched line by line with political donation amounts. And the last of the last was a memo from a developer group named Thorn and Crest signed in pen stating, "All purchases contingent on pre-vote eviction clearance." Jasmine exhaled slowly, the paper trembling just slightly in her hand. This wasn't rumor. This wasn't opinion. This was a paper trail, and whoever left it for her had just lit the fuse on something much bigger than a televised debate. Jasmine spread the spreadsheet across the table like a map of a war already fought. The paper was dense with Roe's names stripped out but addresses intact. Dates, case numbers, LLC owners that didn't sound like people so much as masks. And in the far-right columns, donation IDs, dollar amounts, PAC recipients, timestamps. For a voiceover, keep it clean and concrete. Columns on the sheet, address, zip code, eviction date, court case ID, property owner, LLC phase code donation, ID donation amount, recipient PAC donation, date, internal note. What jumped out first? Timing. In 52 out of 60 entries, she sampled the donation date landed within 24 to 72 hours of the eviction date or of a clearance notation. The rhythm felt too precise to be chance, like a metronome ticking in money. Geography wasn't random, a cluster of addresses set in zip 43211 in adjacent tracks flagged in the contract as phase 3. The spreadsheet used the same phase code. Phase 3 meant now, and amounts spoke their own language. Donations repeated in type bands, 24s or $900, $49 or $800, and no $9,600 amounts that skirted public thresholds when bundled across affiliates. Several lines rerouted through Nevada and Delaware shells, then labeled consulting on the PAC side. Internal notes told the truth. No press release with phrases like post-clearance high-yield zone, selective dislocation complete, and revitalization corridor eligible showed up again and again. Clinical words, violent outcomes. She traced 2 entries with a red pen examples any jury could understand. 1. In 1180 Maple Street, Columbus, 43211, eviction May 3rd, owner Thorn and Crest Redevelopment Partners, LLC, internal note phase 3, tenant removal verified, donation $49,800 to Vance aligned POA, May 5, 272 Briar Court, Columbus, 43211, eviction June 12th, owner Northline Holding LLC, a shell that also appeared on 3 other rows, internal note non-voting density stabilized, donation $24,900 June 13, memo development incentive. Different LLCs, same donors behind them, same schedule. Jasmine didn't need a statistician to feel the pattern, but the numbers would sing the same song to anyone who listened. Then came the crossover. No one could shrug off the spreadsheets. Phase 3 column matched the Urban Redevelopment Strategic Plan Phase 3 on the contract with Vance's signature. 2 artifacts created in different rooms by different hands synchronized like they shared a heartbeat. She flipped the page and found a margin note almost careless in its honesty. All purchases contingent on pre-vote eviction clearance. The same phrase she just read in the memo from Thorn and Crest. She felt the breath leave her chest, not from fear, from recognition. This wasn't policy drift. It was choreography. As she gathered the pages back into a neat stack, the green room hum faded behind the thud of her own pulse. The spreadsheet wasn't merely data. It was a ledger of disappearance, every row, a front door, every amount of goodbye somebody didn't get to say. And if a spreadsheet could read like a confession, it meant someone who built it still had a voice. That was when Jasmine decided the next move wouldn't be numbers. It would be a witness. The bar was half empty, lit by the jaundiced glow of a flickering neon beer sign. Jasmine had picked the place on purpose, anonymous enough to disappear and loud enough to drown any accidental eavesdropping. She sat in a booth with her back to the wall watching the door. At exactly 7:14 p.m. he walked in, mid-40s, dark hair graying at the temples, suit jacket wrinkled, tie loosened like it was choking him all day. He scanned the room, spotted her, and made his way over with the posture of a man who wasn't sure if this was bravery or a mistake. He didn't order a drink, just slid into the seat and spoke before she could say hello. "I've been hiding something," he said, voice low but urgent, "and I can't do it anymore." His hands trembled as he set a battered leather briefcase on the table. The clasp stuck for a second, then popped open with a snap. Inside, stacks of printed ledgers, USB drives labeled in shorthand, and a thin manila folder marked only with 2 words in red ink: clearance engine. "I was a senior accountant at Vance Growth Partners," he said, meeting her eyes like a man waiting for judgment. "What you found, the spreadsheet, that's just the surface. My job, my real job, was to make sure the machine stayed invisible." Jasmine leaned forward. What machine? He swallowed hard. A machine built to erase people, whole neighborhoods, We'd trigger evictions, clear the properties, funnel donations through shell companies, then redevelop. But the numbers, they were just camouflage for something colder. It was automated. Once a zone was tagged as non-productive, the system would start the countdown. People had days, sometimes hours before their lives were gone. His voice cracked, and for a second she thought he might get up and walk out. But he stayed. Every entry, every transaction, I processed it. And every time I told myself it was just business. But it wasn't. It was deleting human beings from a map. Jasmine didn't rush him. The man's shame was heavy, but his words were heavier. Finally, he pushed the manila folder toward her. In here are the emails, the routing orders, Vance's initials on approvals. If you have this and the courage to use it, you can stop him. I'm not sure what happens to me after tonight, but I couldn't carry it anymore. Jasmine slid the folder into her bag without breaking eye contact. She could feel the moment shifting the air between them, charged with the weight of what came next. This was no longer about proving a pattern. It was about dismantling the engine itself. And in the dim hum of that bar, she realized the fight had just gone from public theater to open war. The lights were too perfect, too deliberate. Not the warm chaos of a real town hall, but the clinical precision of a TV set built for a hit job. The stage was a crescent of polished wood, the backdrop a giant screen glowing with the slogan, "Community First" in soft blues and golds. It was the kind of branding meant to feel safe while hiding a blade behind its smile. The audience wasn't random. Every face in the front rows looked like it had been handpicked. Men in tailored suits with crossed arms, women clutching glossy pamphlets with Vance's name stamped across the front, and every one of them paid donors, party loyalist corporate stakeholders sat with the rigid poise of people ready to perform outrage on cue. The moderator, a local news anchor known for softball interviews with political allies, adjusted his earpiece. His smile was wide, but his eyes flicked toward the production booth for confirmation before every sentence. "Welcome, everyone. Tonight we're here for an honest discussion." He began, his tone dripping with false neutrality. Senator Vance and Representative Jasmine Crockett. The applause was uneven, polite for Jasmine, thunderous for Vance. Jasmine walked on stage in a simple black blazer, no frills, no theatrics. But Vance, he strode out like a prizefighter, flashing the kind of grin that said, "I've already won." Jasmine knew the game. The microphone placements, the seating angle, the pre-screened audience questions designed to box her in. Even the lighting had been rigged. Vance bathed in warm amber jasmine under a colder, harsher white. Somewhere in the shadows, a producer counted down to the first blow. The town hall had been running like clockwork, each question a carefully placed stone on the path Vance had laid for Jasmine to stumble over. And then the rhythm broke. A murmur rippled through the back of the hall. Heads turned. The camera operator, caught off guard, swung his lens toward the disturbance. A man in a rumpled gray suit was pushing past security, his eyes fixed on the stage like he had been carrying this moment for years. Jasmine recognized him instantly, the accountant from Vance Growth Partners. The same man who had whispered to her in the parking garage days earlier. "If this comes out, I'll lose everything, but maybe that's the point." He didn't head for the microphone. He didn't need to. In his hand was a single sheet of paper, creased and worn at the edges. He stepped right into the aisle, the live cameras catching every move, and in a voice that somehow sliced through the microphone feedback and crowd noise, he read Section 8, Paragraph 3, Revitalization through Selective Dislocation. The room froze. It was the kind of phrase that sounded harmless to the uninformed until you understood what it meant. Forced removal, targeted eviction, the deliberate erasure of neighborhoods under the pretense of urban renewal. Vance's jaw tightened. His hand twitched toward his water glass. The audience shifted uncomfortably. And in that suspended silence, the accountant's voice echoed like a verdict. For a full 3 seconds after the accountant's words landed, the town hall was dead silent. No coughs, no shuffling of papers, just the electric hum of live broadcast equipment filling the void. Then the dam broke. Gasps turned into shouts. The audience split in two, some demanding answers, others yelling for security to remove him. The moderator's voice wavered, trying to regain control, but it was like shouting into a hurricane. Meanwhile, outside that room, the clip was already on the internet. A journalist in the second row had hit record on their phone the moment the man stood up, and within minutes the video was flooding Twitter, Facebook, TikTok. By the 10-minute mark, selective dislocation was the #1 trending topic worldwide. Political commentators jumped in instantly, half defending Vance as taken out of context, half calling it the smoking gun in a decades-long pattern of racial displacement. TV news cut away from scheduled programming to replay the footage complete with slow-motion close-ups of Vance's frozen face. Jasmine didn't move. She sat there, hands folded, eyes steady on Vance. And as the notifications pinged non-stop on every phone in the room, it was clear this wasn't just a town hall anymore. This was the spark that could burn down an entire career. It didn't take long. By sunrise the next day, the right-wing media machine had shifted into overdrive. Clips of the town hall were chopped into jagged, misleading fragments, removing the accountant's statement entirely and replacing it with a doctored audio track suggesting Jasmine had staged the entire moment for political theater. One network aired a split screen on the left, a loop of Jasmine raising an eyebrow on the right, bold text reading, "Radical race agitator pundits spoke with feigned concern using words like manipulative, dangerous, and divisive, while carefully avoiding any mention of the document or the incriminating phrase selective dislocation." By mid-morning, hashtags like #JasmineScandal and #FakeTownHall began trending among certain circles. Online trolls flooded her social media with doctored images, her face pasted over propaganda posters from decades past. Jasmine watched from her kitchen table phone, buzzing nonstop, each notification another twisted narrative being spun. She knew the playbook: when they can't erase the truth, they bury it under a mountain of lies. By that evening, the smear campaign had met an unexpected wall of people. It started with a handwritten letter slid under the door of Jasmine's district office. No name, just the words, "I don't always agree with you, but you spoke truth. Thank you." Then came a flood. Emails from small towns she'd never visited, video messages from retirees in rural communities, factory workers, teachers, even veterans, some of whom admitted that they had voted for the other side their whole lives. One man wearing a faded Vance for Senate cap posted a video that went viral. "I've supported JD for years, but I watched that whole clip. And folks, what they're doing to her, it's wrong. This isn't about left or right, it's about right and wrong." On social media, unexpected alliances formed. Lifelong conservatives publicly defended Jasmine's integrity, saying they might disagree with her politics, but couldn't stand to see the truth buried. For every doctored image or twisted headline, a dozen voices rose to drown it out. And Jasmine, reading each message late into the night, felt something shift. This fight wasn't hers alone anymore. Among the hundreds of messages, one stopped Jasmine cold. It was written in purple ink on lined notebook paper, the handwriting uneven but careful. The return address wasn't a house, it was a shelter. "Dear Ms. Jasmine, my name is Lila. I'm 12. I live in a place with lots of other kids and moms who had to leave our homes. I heard you on TV say our neighborhood's name. No one ever says it unless it's something bad, but you said it like it matters. Thank you for saying our name when no one else would. Love, Lila." Jasmine read the letter twice, then a third time, tracing the little hearts the girl had drawn in the margins. She imagined Lila in that shelter, clutching a pillow at night, hearing adults whisper about relocation plans and zones. This wasn't politics anymore. This was about children who felt invisible until someone dared to speak for them. And Jasmine knew whatever came next, she couldn't let them down. It arrived in an unmarked manila envelope, no return address, no note, just the weight of truth inside. Jasmine slid the contents onto her desk, a thick 97-page document. The first page alone was enough to make her stomach knot. Columns of names, addresses, and dates that lined up perfectly with the eviction reports she had been tracking for months. As she flipped through, the scope became clear. Bank transfer receipts, shell company registrations, email printouts with subject lines like Q3 clearance schedule and displacement metrics. Every page connected the dots between corporate donations, political action committees, and the exact neighborhoods marked for redevelopment. One spreadsheet was color-coded green for completed displacements, yellow for in progress, red for delayed due to resistance. At the bottom of page 47, a single line hit her like a punch: project, overseen by VGP Executive Board, approved by JD Vance. It wasn't just a smoking gun. It was a detailed blueprint of an entire machine built to erase communities' names, dates, dollar amounts, all laid bare. And now it was in her hands. It didn't happen with cameras rolling. There was no dramatic press conference, no lawyers marching into court with heavy binders. Instead, late on a rainy Thursday afternoon, A single-page notice appeared on the federal court's public docket. Plaintiff J.D. Vance hereby withdraws his complaint effective immediately. No explanation, no apology, just a quiet, calculated retreat. Reporters scrambled for comment, but Vance's office released only a 7-word statement. No further legal action will be pursued. The phones went unanswered. His usually fiery Twitter account stayed silent. For Jasmine, the silence was deafening and suspicious. Men like Vance didn't just walk away unless they knew the fight was lost, or unless losing in public would cost them far more than they were willing to pay. The withdrawal wasn't closure. It was a warning, proof that something bigger was still moving in the shadows. If Vance thought withdrawing the lawsuit would end the fight, he had underestimated Jasmine Crockett. Less than 48 hours later, she was standing on the marble steps of the Capitol, flanked by community leaders, tenant advocates, and a sea of residents holding eviction notices in the air like battle flags. Cameras clicked in rapid fire as she raised a thick stack of papers, her formal petition to the House Oversight Committee. "This is not just about one man's greed," she declared, her voice carrying over the crowd. "This is about a system that treats families as collateral damage in the pursuit of profit. Today I am calling for a full congressional hearing to investigate systemic housing corruption, starting with J.D. Vance and every company tied to these displacements." The document she handed over was more than a petition. It was a roadmap for accountability. It named names, detailed financial trails, and cross-referenced every eviction to political donations and zoning changes. Reporters shouted questions. Jasmine didn't flinch. "The public deserves the truth," she said firmly, "and Congress will hear it whether they like it or not." The hearing room was packed to capacity, journalists lining the back wall, community members clutching folders of evidence, and the low hum of whisper anticipation filling the air. This was the day the House Oversight Committee would finally address the allegations of systemic housing corruption. One seat, however, remained conspicuously empty, the chair reserved for J.D. Vance. The brass nameplate gleamed under the fluorescent lights untouched. Cameras zoomed in, catching the vacant space as a silent statement of his absence. Jasmine Crockett sat tall, her hands folded calmly on the table before her. When the chair recognized her, she rose, adjusted the microphone, and began to speak. "This is not about revenge," she said, her voice steady but charged with emotion. "It's about repair, repairing trust, repairing communities, repairing the damage done to families who were treated as disposable in the name of profit. We are here to ensure that no child grows up thinking eviction is just another season in life." The room was utterly silent. Even the sound of camera shutters seemed to pause as her words sank in. Her testimony was not a personal attack. It was an indictment of a system paired with a vision for something better. Across the nation, millions watched the live feed, many nodding in quiet agreement. For them, this wasn't just politics. It was justice finally speaking out loud. Columbus, Ohio looked different now. The empty lots, once stamped with cold red letters, "Clearance," had been transformed. Instead of bulldozers and chain-link fences, there were swings swaying in the breeze, basketball courts echoing with the laughter of teenagers, and small community gardens blooming with bright marigolds and tomatoes. On the brick wall of the renovated community center hung a single sheet of paper laminated to protect it from the rain. It was a crayon drawing by a 12-year-old girl from the shelter, the same girl who had once written Jasmine a letter of thanks. In bright colors, it showed a row of houses, each with smiling faces in the windows, and above them in uneven handwriting, "Home is where we are safe." And Jasmine stood there quietly, her hands in her coat pockets, watching a group of children race across the grass. She smiled, not the smile of someone who had won a fight, but of someone who had helped plant something that would last. For the first time in a long time, the air here didn't feel heavy with fear. It felt like the beginning of a different story. Jasmine stood before the small crowd, her voice steady, but carrying the weight of everything she had fought through. "You can sue a person, but you can't silence the truth," she said, letting the words hang in the air. The room was quiet, the kind of quiet that meant people were listening, not just hearing. She looked around, meeting the eyes of those who had come and those watching through the cameras. "If you were the last one standing for the truth," she asked, her tone neither bitter nor boastful, "would you stay?" No one answered right away. And maybe that was the point, because some questions aren't meant to be answered out loud, but to live in the back of your mind long after the story ends. This story isn't just about politics, it's about courage. Jasmine's fight reminds us that standing for the truth will cost you something, But surrendering to a lie will cost you everything. Corruption survives in silence, and silence survives when good people decide it's not their fight. So in life, when you see injustice, whether in your community, workplace, or even your own family, remember you may not have the power to change everything, but you have the power to not look away. That's where change begins. If you believe the truth is worth defending, no matter the cost, hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Join our community of people who refuse to look away, who believe that every voice can make a difference. The fight for justice doesn't end here, and neither should you.